Hello, Hidden Gems. Day 15 of the Lindsay Clancy trial. Can you believe we're at day 15? We've been together for 15 days now, guys. And it is the first full day of the defense witnesses. Yes, they went yesterday too. It was almost a full day yesterday for the defense, but the prosecution did rest. So today is a full day of defense witnesses, and holy cow. I mean, it was a big, interesting day. We heard from Patrick Clancy's mother, the other grandmother of these three precious babies, Cora, Dawson, and Callan. And we also heard from the forensic psychologist, Dr. Zeisel, who has been a big part of this trial. So much so that the prosecution spent a lot of time trying to debunk him, trying to say that maybe someone told him to say this, to say that. And so he's on the stand. We're listening to finally what he has to say. He has been seeing Lindsay Clancy for years, has met with her. He waited, 45 plus 30, like almost nearly 100 times. Listen to what he had to say right now, and then we will get in from the beginning.
And tell us what she said to Patrick in your presence on the speakerphone at that point.
She had told Patrick that she loved him very much. She was unable to express a lot of emotion, but she expressed love for him. And she had said that she heard a male voice ordering her, telling her that she didn't have any choice, but she had to kill her children and then kill herself.
Now,
what a moment, right? We're going to get into it. There were a lot of moments like that. We'll start from the very beginning, as we always do. And the first defense witness of the day was none other than Sue Clancy, Patrick Clancy's mother, Lindsay's mother-in-law. And Reddington started by establishing the relationship Sue had with Lindsay and the family. Sue explained that Lindsay had married her son, Patrick, and that they had always had a very good relationship, which actually says a lot. Mother-in-law relationships, you never know. She's saying they had a great relationship. She regularly went to their home. And as the grandparents of Lindsay and Patrick's three children, Sue and her husband saw the family at least a couple of times a month. When asked about her relationship with the children, Sue described it as beautiful. Reddington also spent some time establishing Sue's professional background because it became relevant to what she observed about Lindsay's mental health. Sue was a registered nurse and had worked in labor and delivery for about 38 years. Wow. She explained that while she had kept up with developments in postpartum mental health, to some extent, her career had kind of focused around the delivery room, right, itself. So she was familiar, obviously, with the broader medical discussion surrounding postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis as well, including some of the doctors working in the area. And one of those doctors was Dr. Megan Spinelli, Dr. Meg Spinelli, who Sue had spoken with a few times. If you remember, she was on the stand for the prosecution. So Sue understood that Dr. Spinelli specialized in postpartum mental health. In fact, Sue had actually previously asked Dr. Spinelli to bring her experience and education in postpartum mental health to Sue's colleagues at the hospital. And Dr. Spinelli did give a presentation. So then the questioning turned specifically to Lindsay and what Sue had personally observed after Callan was born in 2022. And Sue testified that several months after Callan's birth, she noticed a change in Lindsay's personality. It's interesting. That was around the fall of 2022. So Reddington asked Sue to describe the kind of mother Lindsay had been for her children. And from Sue's perspective, Sue Clancy's perspective, Lindsay was extremely nurturing and loving. And she described her as a wonderful mother. Now, sorry guys, I'm sipping tea over here. Forgive me for the coughs, but I think that just that alone says something. Think about this isn't Lindsay's mother. This is the mother-in-law. And this is what she is saying about the woman who killed her grandchildren. It was just a fascinating thing, right? I understand why the defense has called Sue Clancy. Sue Clancy describes her as a wonderful mother and nurturing. Sue also testified that she never saw Lindsay treat any of the children as though she didn't want them or didn't love them. In her view, Lindsay loved all of her children very, very much. Specifically, she never saw Lindsay treat Dawson any differently. But by October and November of 2022, Sue was seeing something very different in Lindsay herself. Take a listen.
As a mother-in-law, did you have any observation to observe Lindsay with her kids?
Yes.
Can you tell the jurors about how you saw her acting with her children as a mother?
She was very nurturing, very loving. She was a wonderful mother. Wonderful.
Did you ever see her treat her middle son, Dawson, bad because you didn't like him?
No.
Did she love Dawson, in your opinion?
She loved her children, all of them, very, very much.
And during that period of time, let's say October, November of 2022, what did you observe about Lindsay?
She reached out to me in November and told me that she felt unwell.
Did she describe any symptoms for you?
She did.
Tell the jurors what she said.
She felt mostly she had insomnia. She was losing her appetite. She was very anxious and sad.
Did she tell you that she was seeing doctors?
Yes.
And at some point, did you recommend, did she come to you and ask you for help regarding seeing a doctor?
Yeah, she asked for my support.
And did you obviously gave it to her?
Yes.
And what did you do to make any recommendations for her?
I reached out to my colleagues who were running a clinic for women that were struggling postpartum.
Would that be the South Shore?
Yes, correct.
And at some point, as a result of your intervention, was a nurse practitioner, Julie Hall, agreeing to step in and help out.
Yes,
Did Lindsay see Julie?
I believe she did.
And you really pretty much were out of the mix at that point. You basically made the connection, knew that she was on there, right?
Correct.
Did you find that Lindsay was interested at all times in trying to get better and see doctors?
Very much so.
Did you find at all, or do you have an opinion with your observations of Lindsay as to whether or not she was offered help and would just spurn it and not see doctors and not have
She was
treatment?
begging for help.
And during that period of time, you were there for her by text and by telephone and in person.
Correct.
I agree that to the commenter who just said it speaks volumes that everyone in Lindsay's life, from her in-laws to her parents to friends, are speaking highly of her, right? Of course, that's what Reddington is going to do. That's what the defense is going to do. Anyway, Reddington then brought the timeline forward into November and December, including the 2022 holiday season. And Sue remembered that period as one where Lindsay was struggling and the entire family was very concerned about her. By New Year's, Lindsay eventually ended up in the hospital, and Sue was aware of her hospitalization and later release. And because Sue and Lindsay communicated so frequently through text, Reddington then introduced an extraction report containing messages recovered from Lindsay's phone. And he explained that the state had obtained the messages through an examination of Lindsay's phone and asked Sue whether she recognized the conversations. After looking through the report, Sue said that the messages appeared to be text between herself and Lindsay. So rather than going through every individual message with her on the stand, Reddington told the judge that he intended to admit the full collection so the jurors could review the messages themselves if they wanted to. and he then offered the exhibit. The state made the same objection it had made previously, but the judge overruled the objection and the collection of text messages was admitted into evidence. Buckingham began cross-examination. Buckingham was up by going back to Sue's professional background. That's where she started. She confirmed that she had spent 38 years working as a labor and delivery nurse at South Shore Hospital. She also established that Sue had briefly worked with Lindsay early in Lindsay's career when Lindsay was still a student and before she eventually went to Mass General. So the questioning then returned to Dr. Meg Spinelli. Sue confirmed that she knew Spinelli, but when Buckingham asked whether she had specifically reached out to her about Lindsay's case, Sue wasn't actually certain if she had. She remembered connecting with Spinelli professionally in the past to have her speak at the hospital, but she could not recall exactly how the two of them connected in relation to Lindsay. So when asked whether she had contacted Spinelli specifically because of Lindsay, Sue said she didn't think she had, but could not remember for sure. So then Buckingham then focused on when Sue first became aware that Lindsay was struggling. And although the defense had referenced October and November, Sue acknowledged that she didn't actually become aware of what was happening until November 16th, when Lindsay texted her from the emergency room at South Shore Hospital. Sue went down to see her there. Lindsay had arrived by herself and she had driven herself to the hospital. Sue was working that day, so she could not immediately leave her shift. She waited about an hour and a half before going down to the emergency room and sitting with Lindsay. And after spending some time with her, Sue returned upstairs to work and then later came back down before Lindsay was discharged. Next, Buckingham went over what Lindsay had told Sue that day. Lindsay was having trouble sleeping and was experiencing heart palpitations, which is why she had actually gone to the emergency room. So Buckingham asked whether Lindsay had told Sue that she had consumed a weed gummy. Oh, we're bringing it back to the weed gummy, guys, before going to the ER. And Sue said that she had not disclosed that. She then asked Sue, based on her nursing experience, whether a faster heartbeat could sometimes be a reaction to THC, CBD, or marijuana. Sue wasn't able to say. And while Lindsay was in the emergency room, Sue was present when the doctor evaluated her and prescribed medication. Sue confirmed that the ER doctor had given Lindsay trazodone to help her sleep, which had been one of Lindsay's main concerns. And when Lindsay was discharged, she did not need someone to drive her home. She left the hospital in her own car. And after that emergency room visit, Sue remained in fairly constant contact with Lindsay, primarily through text. She confirmed that they were communicating daily, and those conversations, those were reflected in the text messages that had already been introduced. So then Buckingham moved into how Lindsay became connected with the perinatal behavioral health clinic. Sue was familiar with the clinic through her work at South Shore Hospital, but she clarified that Julie Paul wasn't actually the first person she contacted. She initially spoke to one of the midwives she worked with, a woman Sue believed was named Nanette. So Nanette suggested Julie Paul and provided the connection that eventually led to Lindsay seeing her. Sue reached out to Julie. Sue reached out to Julie with Lindsay's permission. And once Sue knew Lindsay had made contact with Julie and was going to the clinic, Sue described herself as stepping back from that part of the process. So then, Buckingham then asked about Julie Paul in relation to a civil lawsuit that was pending. She suggested that Julie was one of the few prescribers Lindsay had encountered who hadn't been personally named in that lawsuit. Sue wasn't sure about that. After that, the timeline was established. Lindsay's emergency room visit occurred on November 16th, and contact with Julie Paul was made around November 20th. Sue could not remember exactly whether her first contact with Julie had been by phone, but agreed that the timing sounded right. And from there, Buckingham began asking about whether Sue had offered to take on more childcare while Lindsay was struggling. Sue said that she had offered to help with the children. At the time, though, Sue was still working full-time on the day shift, so her ability to help was limited by her work schedule. Buckingham specifically asked whether Sue had offered to watch the children overnight so Lindsay could sleep. Sue could not remember exactly whether she had made that specific offer. The children never stayed overnight at Sue's house, but Sue pushed back when Buckingham characterized that as Lindsay not wanting the children to go to their house. And I get it. That wasn't how Sue remembered it. I mean, take a listen to this, and I have some things to say.
Did you work day shifts? Did you work mids?
I worked the day shift.
So did you offer to watch the kids at nighttime?
I don't remember exactly.
Did the kids come to stay at your house overnight so that she could get some sleep?
No, they didn't.
Fair to say you offered and she didn't want the kids to come to your house, right?
No, that's not right.
Well, were they, did they ever sleep over your house?
No, they didn't.
And Cora was 5, right?
Yes, correct. She turned 5 that December.
So at any point, they never stayed over.
We decided together it was best for them to be in their own beds at their own house with all their belongings. And Lindsay's parents were very actively involved in staying over and helping out. So it was the best decision that they stay home in their own beds.
So prior to the November of 2022, did you and your husband ever come and stay over the night so that Patrick and Lindsay could go off?
We never did stay at their house.
And as far as kind of watching the kids or taking the kids outside of the house during the daytime, did you often take Cora on kind of day trips out to lunch?
Yeah, we used to go to lunch together.
How about Dawson? Did you take him one-on-one out to?
Not as much. He was younger.
And how about Callan? Did you ever take him out of the house without Lindsay?
No.
And are you aware that Lindsay told one of the therapists that she wasn't close with you as in-laws? And that
I didn't know that, no.
That she said she doesn't generally allow the in-laws to watch her children?
I did watch the kids.
Okay, but are you aware that she told the therapist that?
No.
Are you aware she told the therapist that she didn't have any particular reason why and that they don't bug me about it either?
I didn't know any of that.
I mean, wow. I mean, sugar-free cereal says children are often closer with their maternal grandparents. That's completely normal. Others just commented that that was so rude. You know, I was really kind of surprised the prosecution went there as well. I'm starting to kind of, I think I want to nickname this prosecution the Puritan, you know, prosecution of Plymouth, right? I don't know. It's, I don't know what she's trying to do there. So you're sort of trying to discredit the grandmother as an expert witness. Like, it seems like something you would do to an expert witness, right? Try to, as the prosecution would try to discredit a witness, you try to say, well, are you really a professional? Did you really do everything you claim you did in your resume? That's the job of, you know, both sides, right? To do that to a grandmother, I mean, that's what it felt like she was doing. But were you really close to your dead grandchildren? Were you really close? You know, do you really miss them? I just thought it was, you know, really heartbreaking because Sue Clancy, no matter what you think of Lindsay Clancy, Sue Clancy, a grandmother to these 3 children, is a victim. And I felt like it was just rubbing salt in the wound. And so for the prosecution to say that they are all about justice for these 3 children, to do that to their grandmother who's innocent in this, I thought it was a really bad look. And I wonder what the jury's going to think. I'll just share that. You know, anyway, I'll continue. Buckingham then returned to Lindsay's communications with Sue about her symptoms and treatment. Sue confirmed that Lindsay texted her about her difficulty sleeping and the medication she was taking. They also discussed the trazodone prescribed during the November 16th emergency room visit. Buckingham asked about a conversation in which Lindsay was told it was okay to increase the trazodone. If she wasn't getting enough relief, go ahead, up it. Sue explained that the doctor had given Lindsay that instruction, and Sue had simply repeated what the doctor told her. So, checking out my notes here. So, when Buckingham asked whether Sue knew Lindsay had actually increased the dosage, Sue said she didn't. And then Buckingham returned to the period after Lindsay began seeing Julie Paul. Sue confirmed that she continued talking to Lindsay about how she was feeling and was aware that Lindsay had started taking new medications after seeing Julie. Buckingham continued by going back to Lindsay's medications and concerns she had been expressing to Sue. And at some point, after Lindsay had been prescribed medication, she told Sue that she believed she had developed a benzodiazepine dependency. So Sue only vaguely remembered that conversation, but Buckingham pointed her to a November 29th message in which Lindsay wrote that she felt deep down that she had developed a benzodependence after only 2 weeks of using it. To me, it feels like a little bit of paranoia, only after 2 weeks. She also expressed frustration that she felt nobody was listening to her concerns and that different medications kept being added without addressing what she believed was the underlying problem. Sue agreed the message sounded familiar. The conversation continued with Lindsay asking Sue whether she shouldn't take the medication, followed by the concern that if she did not take it, she would not sleep. Well, Sue couldn't say with certainty that she remembered the specific exchange, but said that it sounded right. And the following day, November 30th, Lindsay sent another message saying she wasn't okay and was terrified of taking her medications that night. Well, Buckingham had Sue look at the exchange. Sue's response asked Lindsay why she was scared, what she thought would happen if she didn't take the medication, what exactly she was afraid of, and whether Ambien was an option. Buckingham suggested that this showed that Sue was actively trying to help Lindsay navigate all of the medications she was dealing with. Sue agreed, while also pointing out that there were a lot of medications involved. Buckingham clarified that Lindsay hadn't been prescribed all of these medications at one time. Rather, different combinations and options had been discussed at different points, which Sue said seemed confusing. Lindsay was also very specific with Sue about what she was taking. The conversation referenced medications, including Ativan and Remeron, but Sue wasn't completely certain of every medication when asked about them from memory. Another November 30th message had Lindsay acknowledging that she understood medications could take time to reach a therapeutic level and produce their intended effect. Sue remembered that part of the conversation. She was like, yeah, that's true. Lindsay also told her that she was depressed and believed the depression had been caused by the medication. Sue didn't independently remember that statement, but when Buckingham showed her the message, she agreed that Lindsay had written that. The cross-examination then moved into the holidays.
Now, you were asked about the holidays and Thanksgiving. You remember Thanksgiving? Where did you guys go for Thanksgiving?
To my daughter's house.
And do you remember telling the grand jury that during Thanksgiving things were better?
I don't recall.
Well, do you remember her saying that she said things were better? Do you remember that?
Vaguely.
Okay. You were asked, what was Lindsay like during the big Thanksgiving gathering? What observations did you make? Answer, she smiled. The girls all had Thanksgiving t-shirts on that sort of matched. We took a picture. She mostly focused on the kids and interacting with the cousins and the aunts and uncles. At one point, she went off a little into the distance, and I approached and asked her how she was doing, and she said, I'm trying hard to get better. I'm still working at it. I asked about her sleep. I thought that was important, and also the fact that she lost some weight. She didn't have an appetite, and she said things were getting better.
Okay.
Now, during the holidays, you in fact took some time off of work so that you were around a little bit more, correct?
Correct.
And so when you were around a little bit more, did you spend all day, every day at their house?
No.
Fair to say you would come sometimes play with the kids, right?
Yes.
Do shopping for her.
Correct.
And then you actually went on vacation.
Yes.
You and your husband went to Aruba.
Yes.
How long were you in Aruba?
5 or 6 days, I think.
Okay. And now moving towards Christmas, you had dinner with them at their house on the 23rd, right?
I don't remember.
Okay. Do you remember breakfast on Christmas Day?
Yes.
Was that at their house or someplace else?
Their house.
Okay. And then what did you guys do after breakfast?
We went to church.
And fair to say, you've previously testified that breakfast was great
Yes.
and that church was beautiful.
Yes.
And in fact, the defendant, she told you that it was great and that she was glad she went to church that day on Christmas Day.
Yes, she did.
And then after that, you're aware they went down to Connecticut to see her family.
Right.
Now, are you an active member in the Catholic Church?
Yes.
So you're aware that murder is considered a mortal sin?
Yeah, Counsel, could I see you over here? All right, and what that means is you are not to consider it for any reason or any purpose, okay? All right.
The punitive Puritans of Plymouth, I think, just officially did earn that. The punitive, Puritan, well, we will add punitive prosecution of Plymouth. Well, there's a lot of P's going on here. I think they just earned that nickname officially. I was thinking it was quite punitive. And not only that, to bring up, did you know that murder is a moral sin is actually, it's crossing the boundaries between church and state, right? We don't know what Sue Clancy believes. A moral, a sin is religion. It is church. And there is a separation between church and state in trials. It was very shocking, so much so that you saw that the judge stood right up and he knew you are not to share, to even consider that question. I was shocked that the prosecution went there and crossed the line into religion and faith in such a way, and questioned, the grandmother. Did you know this about, it was just, wow. Couldn't believe it. Could not believe it. It was a very shocking moment. And there is already a lot of discourse online also about that question. People are trying to figure out why they would even go there, where Buckingham was even going with that. And you could tell, like, by the judge, you saw his question. He stood up and was like, look, no, the judge objected it, his face when he told the jury to disregard the question. Anyway, after that, Buckingham continued.
So you were aware, Mrs. Clancy, about the stay at McLean Hospital from January 1st to January 5th, correct?
Yes.
And did you come to the house to help with the kids during that time period?
Yes.
And fair to say, when she came home on the 5th, there was a party for Cora on the 7th.
Yes.
Did you go to the birthday party?
No.
Were you at the house much between January 7th and January 24th?
I don't remember.
Do you recall previously reporting that you hadn't been at the house?
I don't remember.
And during that time period, you never took the kids on a day trip or for a visit?
I don't recall.
And were you aware that between January 7th and January 24th that Pat and Lindsay went to the Cape Codder with the kids?
I'm aware of that.
And that they went to the Museum of Science with the kids?
Yes.
And that Pat left Dawson and Callan home, or excuse me, left Dawson and Callan home to go take Cora skiing. Were you aware of that?
It sounds accurate to me.
On the ski trip, did they ask you to come over and stay with Lindsay while she was with the other kids?
I don't remember.
And you were asked on direct examination about Lindsay going to see providers, and you said, I think she was begging for help. right?
She was.
Did you attend any of those meetings with her therapists or doctors?
No.
So you don't know what she told the providers, right?
I don't know.
And you don't know what kind of help she asked for other than medication, do you?
No.
And do you know whether there was any other options offered to her other than McLean, like a partial hospitalization program or intensive outpatient? Were you aware of those options?
Yeah.
And do you know if she went?
She went to Women and Infants.
So that's the one day where Pat dropped her off and went skiing and then came back, right?
I believe so.
Nothing further.
All right, Ms. Springton, redirect?
So she asked you about options that were available to Lindsay, correct?
Yes.
You mentioned one of them was that she could go to the Women and Infants program in Rhode Island that specializes in perinatal and postpartum, right?
Yes.
You know that she went there, right?
Correct.
You know she was turned away because she was over-medicated, right?
Yes.
You also know that they gave her numbers to call suicide hotlines, right?
Yes.
She called twice, not once, but twice, and again was turned away. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Come on.
On that. So you're aware she was turned away because she told you she was turned away, right?
I don't remember the details of that visit or that day.
You didn't review the records, did you?
No.
So you're not aware that they actually deferred to Pat and Lindsay reporting over medication?
I remember something being said that she wasn't a candidate for that program. That's what I recall being told by Patrick and Lindsay.
Okay. And that's because everything she described was reported connected to medication and occurred well after what's considered the postpartum period, right?
I don't know.
Well, you're a labor and delivery nurse. You know the postpartum period could be up to a year, right?
I've heard it could be longer.
But generally, it's within the first 12 weeks that you start to see some symptoms.
I don't know.
You're aware that she was sent from Women and Infants with actually several options, where it included inpatient treatment for medication management, a partial hospitalization program focused on general mental health, or continued outpatient management. That's what she was sent away with.
Okay.
Nothing further.
May I? One more?
Go ahead, one.
So outpatient management, that would include somebody like Gelada, right?
Yes.
You know that Women and Infants called Gelada and she never called them back?
I didn't know that.
Come on, anything on that?
No.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Let me step down. Thank you.
Well, with that, Sue was excused. The next defense witness was Dr. Donald Condi, another doctor, and Reddington began by establishing his very extensive background in psychiatry. We heard a lot from a lot of doctors, right, during prosecution for 15 days. So Dr. Condi describes himself as a child, adolescent, and adult clinical and forensic psychiatrist. A significant part of his career has involved treating people with serious psychiatric disorders, particularly psychotic disorders and mood disorders. He explained that at the Massachusetts Mental Health Center, many patients have either no insurance or Mass Health, and at any given time, a large portion of the patients are dealing with psychosis or major depressive disorder. That also includes treating women who were pregnant or had recently given birth. So Dr. Condi testified that he had encountered postpartum psychiatric illness dating all the way back to his residency in the 1980s. At the Massachusetts Mental Health Center, he treated pregnant patients who sometimes experienced psychosis, as well as women who had recently delivered and were hospitalized with conditions ranging from psychotic depression to self-harming thoughts. And he said he had continued encountering those situations throughout his career. For 14 years, Dr. Condi had also served as the chief medical officer of VinFan, which is a large agency with contracts throughout the Massachusetts and Connecticut Departments of Developmental Services. This organization operates hundreds of group homes and serves thousands of patients. He said that pregnancy and psychiatric medication comes up frequently in that setting as well. And some women take medication for psychosis while pregnant. And Dr. Condi testified that in some cases, the severity of psychosis increases after delivery. He had been a licensed physician in Massachusetts since 1983, meaning he has more than 40 years of experience in medicine. Reddington also went through Dr. Condi's work from Mass General Hospital. And from 1990 through 2012, he was affiliated with forensic child psychiatry there, and he continued doing forensic case consultations with the hospital afterward. His career has also His career has actually also included teaching. He was a fellow at Harvard Medical School, where he taught medical students about general psychiatry, child and adolescent psychiatry, and forensic psychiatry. He has also authored scientific and medical publications. Reddington offered Dr. Condi's CV, or curriculum vitae, as an exhibit. So a curriculum vitae it's basically a detailed document that outlines a person's academic and professional history, a CV. Then the questioning turned specifically to Lindsay. Dr. Condi made an important distinction that even though he knows about Lindsay's case, he has never personally met her, spoken with her, or evaluated her. He has not evaluated Lindsay for criminal responsibility either. Instead, Reddington explained that he had consulted with Dr. Condi about psychopharmacology and issues involving psychiatric medications, particularly medications used in pregnant and postpartum women. So Reddington then asked what records Dr. Condi had reviewed in preparing his opinions, and his review included records from nurse practitioner Rebecca Gelata, records from psychiatrist Dr. Jennifer Tufts, Brigham and Women's Hospital records, Women and Infants records, and McLean Hospital records. He was also familiar with Lindsay's background, including her work as a labor and delivery nurse, her husband Patrick, and her 3 children. So from there, Reddington took the jury back to the fall of 2022, and based on his review of the records, Dr. Condi understood that Lindsay was planning to return to her job as a labor and delivery nurse at Mass General. She worked overnight shifts. Around the same period, she began experiencing postpartum anxiety, which she had also experienced to some extent after her first 2 deliveries. After Callan was born, Lindsay started seeing Dr. Tufts as her treating psychiatrist. Dr. Condi testified that Lindsay began treatment with Dr. Tufts around the middle of September 2022, and her final appointment with her was January 23rd, 2023. He had reviewed Dr. Tufts' records and described them as somewhat sparse. There were many checkboxes, but not a lot of detailed narrative describing what happened during each session. The appointments themselves were conducted by video. Reddington then began going through the medications Dr. Tufts prescribed, and the first was Zoloft at a dose of 25 milligrams. Dr. Condi explained that Zoloft, or sertraline, is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So if you want to know what SSRI stands for, there you go. It's an antidepressant that can be used to treat both anxiety and depressive symptoms. But he explained that the medication can have the opposite effect in some people. Some patients can experience jitterness or increased anxiety, particularly when they are first taking it. So while the medication can be beneficial, there are also potential side effects.
It also has, in some people, an effect of causing a feeling of jitteriness and increasing anxiety. So it's something that does have some potential side effects as well as beneficial effects.
And when she was prescribed the original 25 milligrams of Zoloft, did she in fact take that, or did she defer on taking that?
My recollection of the records is that she had it prescribed, picked it up, but did not take it for at least a couple of weeks because she did not wish to take medication. She was, I believe, still breastfeeding at that time. There are medications, and Zoloft would be one, that would likely appear to some extent in the breast milk.
Okay, so because she was worried about that, she held off on that, but ultimately did take the prescription from Dr. Tufts. Is that right?
The records indicate that she did eventually start taking
Does it
the
indicate,
25 milligrams.
Sorry. Does it indicate when she started taking them after that little hiatus?
To be exact, I'd have to look at the records, but I believe it was at the end of September.
And was that dosage increased at some point?
It increased from 25 milligrams to 50 milligrams.
And what happened when Lindsay took the 50 milligrams of Zoloft prescribed by Dr. Tufts?
The records indicate that she had a rather rapid series of difficulties, that she had insomnia for, I believe the records say 48 hours, couldn't sleep. It's something that would be called activation, that these medications can cause in some people who are more susceptible.
Now, by mid-October, after she began taking the Zoloft, would you agree that the records indicate a week after starting the medication and increasing the dose, she reported in October to Dr. Tufts what you're relating is that she felt, how did she describe it to Dr. Tufts? If you could, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Well, she felt that she talked about being numb. She talked about not being herself. She talked about feeling worse, not better. Antidepressants usually take at least 2 to 3 and frequently 4 to 6 weeks to have useful effects, but sometimes side effects can happen very quickly.
Did she also indicate, looking at your affidavit, that she was crying all day, she was experiencing mental fog, terrified to start something new, anxiety had gotten much worse? Did she tell that to Dr. Tufts at that time at the end of October?
Yes, I do recall those things being in the record.
All right, and following through again on your affidavit, was there further explanation from Lindsay's recitation of symptomology to Dr. Tufts? Did she further state about racing thoughts, paranoia? What did she say? Looking at your report, look at your affidavit if that helps you refresh your memory.
I actually don't have the affidavit with me at the moment. I do have some of the records, but
Well, let me just approach you then and hand you your affidavit, paragraph 13, and see if that refreshes your memory.
thank you. Yes.
What did she say to Dr. Tufts?
She reported, Dr. Tufts reported that Lindsay's psychiatric condition was generally deteriorating. That's a checkbox on one of the forms that her records.
What did Lindsay say her symptoms were at that point?
That she was having the racing thoughts, and that she was also feeling, as I said, not like herself, that her depression was worse than it had been.
So around the same period, Dr. Tufts considered trying a medication called Zulresso. And Dr. Condi explained that Zulresso was a relatively unusual treatment. It was administered through a continuous IV infusion lasting about 60 hours, right? Wow. With medical monitoring required throughout the entire treatment. And it wasn't necessarily required to be administered inside a hospital, but it did require a medical setting capable of providing that level of monitoring. The treatment also came with a very high price tag. No, like literally a very high price tag. Dr. Condi testified that the medication alone costs around $34,000 before the cost of monitoring. And ultimately, Lindsay never received the Zulresso treatment. The records then showed a change after Lindsay stopped taking Zoloft. According to Dr. Condi, she reported feeling more like herself again and less anxious after discontinuing it. The next medication discussed was Benadryl. Lindsay continued having trouble sleeping, and her anxiety was also being affected by concerns about her children, right? So at one point, her son was coughing, and Lindsay became extremely worried about the children's health. And that concern was another thing that interfered with her ability to sleep. So then, as November moved into December, the records continued documenting a range of symptoms. Lindsay reported dizziness, feeling sedated when she woke up, assuming she had been able to sleep at all, and what she sometimes described as brain fog. She also continued experiencing significant anxiety. Dr. Condi explained that these kinds of complaints were frequently reported by women experiencing postpartum depression, although he emphasized that the experience itself could be extremely unpleasant. Eventually, Lindsay's treatment moved away from Dr. Tufts and toward another provider. She began seeing Rebecca Gelada, a nurse practitioner with South Shore Perinatal Program. Reddington established that Lindsay's connection to that program had initially come through her mother-in-law, who we just heard from, Sue Clancy. According to Dr. Condi's understanding of the records, Sue had a professional connection with someone involved in the perinatal program and helped establish this connection. Julie Paul was also involved in Lindsay's care early on. Reddington then brought Dr. Condi to a November 27th entry from Julie Paul's records. The note documented Lindsay reporting that she felt disassociated and wasn't really in touch with reality. Dr. Condi explained that disassociation could mean a person felt as though the things happening around them weren't real. Reddington asked whether that was a serious symptom, and Dr. Condi agreed that it was. He also testified that disassociation could occur in women experiencing postpartum psychosis. Reddington then asked Dr. Condi to explain what psychosis actually meant. He described psychosis generally as a loss of the ability to accurately distinguish what was real from what wasn't. And I'm going to say that again because it is interesting. What is psychosis? It is, according to Dr. Condi, a loss of the ability to accurately distinguish from what is real from what isn't real. So someone experiencing psychosis could have delusions, which Dr. Condi described as fixed, false beliefs. So for example, a person might believe that God had instructed them to do something. Psychosis could also involve hallucinations. Dr. Condi explained that auditory hallucinations were more common than visual hallucinations. In other words, the person might hear something that wasn't actually there. So when Reddington asked whether the records showed Lindsay experiencing auditory hallucinations, Dr. Condi confirmed that there were times when she reported hearing a voice. As December continued, the records documented even more severe symptoms. Dr. Condi remembered Lindsay describing herself as being heavy, unable to get out of bed, right? Unable to bathe, unable to react, unable to love, and unable to feel. Those weren't Dr. Condi's descriptions of her condition. They were phrases that Lindsay herself had used when communicating with her medical providers. He confirmed that these statements appeared in the records from both Dr. Tufts and nurse practitioner Rebecca Gelada. And during that same November and December period, Gelada prescribed additional medications. Dr. Condi wasn't certain of every medication without looking directly at the records, but he recalled continued use of Benadryl. At the time, Buspar or buspirone was also discussed as an anti-anxiety medication. Another medication that came up was Remeron, and Dr. Condi explained that Remeron, whose generic name is mirtazapine. Yeah, there you go. Did I say it right? Mirtazapine is an antidepressant that can also help with sleep and appetite. Reddington asked whether it was similar to medications like Zoloft and Prozac. And Dr. Condi explained that it had an antidepressant effect and interacted with the serotonin system, but it was not an SSRI like Zoloft or Prozac. Mirtazapine also has effects on the another system, which is involved in the body's response to things like fear and stress. And so then by this point, Lindsay's medication history has become increasingly complicated. She's been prescribed Prozac, Remeron, Benadryl, and other medications aimed at treating anxiety, depression, sleep problems, and related symptoms. Dr. Condi confirmed that this was the collection of medications being considered or prescribed during this period of her treatment. Reddington then had Dr. Condi explain some of the basic science behind SSRI, since medications like Zoloft have become such a significant part of Lindsay's treatment.
Generic names, but
Okay.
yes, Remeron is.
Around this time, Lindsay has been prescribed the Prozac, she had been prescribed the Remeron, she had been prescribed the Benadryl, she had been prescribed other medications very similar to the SSRIs. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, and does the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, that's fancy word, what does it mean? Isn't that serotonin in your brain? Doesn't it block or in some fashion affect your brain?
It's a little complicated to explain, but
Let's explain
serotonin.
it. Tell the jury what serotonin means and what happens when you take an SSRI, please.
Okay, serotonin in this sense is a neurotransmitter. The brain is a relatively complicated place. It has about 86 billion nerve cells. They've got thousands of connections to each other, but they're not like the wires in your house where you put two pieces of wire together, twist the copper, and then put a nut on that. Nerves don't touch. They go close to each other, but there's a space between them, and that's called the synaptic cleft. One nerve secretes a neurotransmitter into the synaptic cleft, and it moves over to the next nerve in line where there's a receptor. Serotonin does that in the synaptic cleft, but it's also taken back up by the nerve that secreted it so it's reuptaked. So a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor slows down the reuptake of serotonin, prolonging its activity in the synaptic cleft, which causes the next nerve in line to be activated. I'm sorry that it's so complicated. So that's what serotonin is doing, and that's what a reuptake
When a woman
inhibitor
is
does.
pregnant or has just had a baby, can you tell me what effect, for example, hormones have when a person has a baby? I know we're two guys, but I mean, do you know what happens when a woman has a baby?
I've been at quite a few deliveries, yes.
Okay.
The fact is that many hormones increase. So progesterone is a hormone that many people have heard of. It's a component of birth control pills because it promotes gestation. So progesterone in a birth control pill fools the body into thinking it's pregnant, which means it doesn't, the woman doesn't produce eggs that could be fertilized. And that's the way the birth control pill works, or some of them do. Progesterone goes down very quickly after birth, as do many other hormones that are going up and then down after birth.
So if the hormones go up, and if there's an overload, if you will, might be the wrong word, of hormones, what effect does that have on the human body? What effect does that have on a woman who's just had a baby?
Well, it's quite complicated.
Just tell us basically what your feeling is. If they want to get into it, they can ask. But what effect does it have on a woman that has a baby?
Well, one of the other hormones that goes up is prolactin. So after the woman gives birth, prolactin promotes lactation, and it's a hormone that increases so that the mother can then breastfeed. These hormones are also seen in all mammals that feed their young through producing milk. So it's a very common mammalian thing to do. But other kinds of things can happen to
Did you say males or mammals?
mammals.
Okay, because mammals don't breastfeed, right?
I'm sure they don't, yes.
Okay, so as far as the hormone, again, I would ask when a woman has a baby and the placenta, I think I pronounced that right, is through the birth. All of a sudden, what happens? It stops that massive influx of hormones, or it increases that influx of hormones?
Well, some hormones go up, like prolactin, and some hormones go down very quickly.
What effect does that have in your experience and your education and your research on women that have a baby? What effect does that have on them?
Well, many women experience postpartum blues.
What is postpartum blues?
It's a feeling of,
Thing.
I'm sorry?
Sounds like a 50s thing. What's postpartum blues?
It's a feeling of low energy and being sad, not as serious or usually as long as postpartum depression.
What is postpartum depression? Is that the next level?
It's a more serious condition where the woman may feel that she can't connect to the baby, that she feels isolated, she has no energy, she may also have insomnia.
So, for example, if a woman is unable to sleep, feels as though she's losing a contact or connection with her infant, is stressing about not having that contact with her infant, feels that she's unable to emote or feel love or any emotions and can't relate to people and also is out of reality, are those, or dissociative state, are those, in your opinion, symptoms of postpartum depression and or leading to postpartum psychosis?
Yes, they are.
And Lindsay had those symptoms, didn't she?
She reported all those symptoms, yes.
Doctor, when a doctor like Tufts is meeting with a person and checking the boxes, can that doctor give a blood test to the patient?
Certainly.
Is that important in your opinion, that a doctor give a patient, especially a woman who's coming to them for help with these symptoms, give them a blood test?
Yes.
And again, we all know what blood tests are, but just tell me, I mean, is that a simple test? Is it a complicated test?
It's fairly simple to have blood drawn, and there are many tests that are relevant, particularly after a woman has given birth.
Why?
Well, some women become anemic. Depends on how much blood loss might have occurred during birth, but there's usually some blood loss. So checking hemoglobin levels is important. The thyroid can be affected by delivery of the baby. And some women in the postpartum period develop inflammation of the thyroid. The thyroid is a very important gland that regulates many parts of the body.
Is that why many times when a competent psychiatrist is treating a patient that is postpartum after having a baby, that they might run, and I may be wrong saying it, but a thyroid test?
They would do most commonly two different kinds of thyroid tests. They would test for thyroid stimulating hormone, which goes up when the thyroid hormones that also can be tested for actually go down. So thyroid stimulating hormone is telling the body, make more thyroid hormone because it's not enough in the circulation.
Did Tufts ever use a blood test at all in her treatment?
No, she did not.
Did Tufts ever check the thyroid levels of Lindsay Clancy at all during her treatment?
No, she did not.
How about Gelada? Did they test any of those things?
No, Nurse Gelada did not do blood testing either.
Now, you've made reference, sir, to postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis. You're familiar with the DSM, or what is referred to as DSM
5TR.
Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. 5, you said TR, that would be right there, meaning text revision.
Correct.
All right. And I'm approaching you with this and asking, you see that section there?
Yes.
And what is that section?
The bipolar and related disorder section.
What is bipolar disorder? What does that mean?
Bipolar is the newer name for what used to be called manic depressive illness. It describes an illness where people's moods go up, which is the manic phase, and then go down, which is the depressed phase. There are different categories of bipolar disorder. Bipolar 1 is the most serious. Bipolar 2 disorder also has similar fluctuations of mood, but in both cases of bipolar disorder, most people spend more time being depressed than they do being manic.
Now, just tell me, what does manic mean? What does that actually mean?
They feel usually euphoric, that they don't have,
They're up?
you're really up.
Okay.
You're extremely optimistic. You might spend a lot of money foolishly, but you wouldn't worry about that because certainly you're going to win the lottery. You can just feel it. So there can be psychotic thoughts along with bipolar mania, unreasonable expectations. Like I said, that you're destined to win the lottery, or in serious cases, you can believe that God is speaking to you and has appointed you to do some special thing in life.
How about excessive cleaning and, let's say, divesting oneself of personal property, cleaning garages, things of that nature?
There was talk in the records of an episode where Miss Clancy and her husband cleaned out the garage, but it was difficult to tell from the records whether or not that represented what we would call a hypomanic episode.
Exercise. Was there a lot of references to exercise?
There were a lot of references to exercise, and exercise can be a very useful thing.
Sure, that's one of the things that a woman in postpartum may very well be prescribed to do by a doctor or a nurse practitioner like Gillotta, right?
I believe that nurse practitioner Julie Paul recommended a long run at one point.
So there's nothing wrong with a woman going to, let's say, Kingsbury or whatever it is, or taking her kids to the local gym with a swimming pool and trying to get some exercise in the postpartum stage. That doesn't, that's something you wouldn't hold against her, right?
No.
Okay. Now, how about, are you aware that within a very short period of time after she had baby Callan, that she actually ran a road race?
Yes.
Is that indicative of a person that's kind of ramped up and doing these things you're talking about?
It's unusual to decide to run so soon after delivering a baby. I believe that she ran on the day that she might have delivered her last child, Callan.
That's correct. So during the month of December, in your review of the records, would you agree that her symptoms that she has related to the doctors that were there to help her, they basically increased, did they not?
I'm sorry, I couldn't
They
quite
increased.
hear. Yes.
And are you aware that then she went somewhere voluntarily in December?
Yes.
Where?
She went to the Mass General Emergency Room on, I believe that was in December. She had gone to the South Shore Emergency Room previously.
And did you, in the records, see that, in fact, she had gone to Women and Infants program in Rhode Island for a day?
Yes.
And are you familiar with that particular establishment? Is that supposedly helps pregnant women?
Yes, I reviewed those records as well.
And do you know why she was discharged after a day?
The records stated that they thought that she was having complications from medications more than she was suffering from postpartum issues, and therefore was not a good candidate for their program.
And this was after getting there at 8 in the morning and leaving there around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right?
That's my understanding, yes.
And the records indicate, if you read them, that during that period of time, there were little group discussions and coloring sessions and things like that. Is that correct?
Yes.
You know that there are suicide hotlines that people are told to call, right?
All right. So after that, the question, by the way, I've got cute Lily here with me, by the way, the head of HR who wants me to pet her right now. So I'm going to do that. If you see my arm moving, The questioning, though, then moved to the suicide hotline contacts documented in the records, which is actually a very big deal, something we need to talk about. First, we have a wonderful advertisement from a trial sponsor. We're so grateful for our trial sponsors. Take a listen, and we'll be right back. Something I don't talk about a lot is what happens after we finish recording, because covering these cases, you don't just turn it off. There are nights where my body is exhausted. I'm ready for bed, but my brain is still going, replaying everything. I've always struggled with sleep. That's no secret. I've shared about my insomnia here. And for a while, I had this nightly ritual with Beam Dream that was really intentional. This year got busy, really busy. Late nights turned into researching, writing, keeping up with everything. And honestly, I stopped prioritizing sleep. I skipped the ritual and I felt it. So I have been trying to get back to myself, and that starts with how I end my day. I have brought Beam Dream back into my routine, and it's becoming that signal again. The day is over. That's what it means. I'll make a cup. Sometimes I'll put a little bit of hot milk or oat milk in it. Just sit for a few minutes. No phone, no notes, just letting my body catch up. What I love is that it doesn't knock me out. It just helps me slow down and fall asleep naturally. It's made with things like magnesium and L-theanine, reishi mushroom. It's low calorie, 15 to 20 calories with no sugar, no dairy, no gluten. I've noticed I'm falling asleep a lot faster. I'm not waking up in the middle of the night, and I actually wake up feeling rested, which everyone is happy about, because as a mom and a wife, that matters. I need energy. I need patience. That starts with sleep. For me, this isn't a quick fix. It's just a small nightly rhythm that helps me wind down and improve everything else in my life. So if you've been struggling with sleep too, you can check it out at shopbeam.com/truecrime and use code TRUECRIME for up to 30% off your first order. I've linked it below. The QR code is on the screen. And honestly, if anything, maybe this is just a reminder. Even a few minutes at night to slow down, get rid of those screens. It can make more of a difference than you know. Well, Reddington then asked whether people experiencing serious postpartum psychiatric symptoms are sometimes instructed to contact a hotline if they feel like they might hurt themselves. And Dr. Condi said yes, he agreed that this was an instruction sometimes given, although he clarified that it wouldn't necessarily have been the advice he personally would give in every circumstance. The records showed that Lindsay contacted the Aspire hotline twice, not once, but 2 times. And according to Dr. Condi's review, Aspire determined that Lindsay didn't have a specific suicide plan and therefore did not meet their criteria for what is considered a higher level of care, such as inpatient admission. And by this point, Reddington had laid out a sequence of attempts Lindsay had made to get treatment. She had been seeing nurse practitioner Gelada. She had contacted the Aspire hotline twice. She had gone to Women and Infants in Rhode Island after being directed there, only to leave after she wasn't accepted into their program. Reddington continued the timeline by picking up after Lindsay's 2 calls to the Aspire hotline. Eventually, Lindsay and Patrick went to an emergency room. Dr. Condi testified that the first time Lindsay went to the Mass General emergency room, the medical team recommended that she consider an inpatient admission at McLean. And at that point, though, Lindsay and Patrick decided they didn't want her to be admitted, and it wasn't long before she returned to the emergency room. This time, Lindsay was admitted to McLean Hospital and spent approximately 4 days on a locked inpatient unit. Reddington then returned to the possibility of bipolar disorder. And Dr. Condi explained that bipolar disorder was something a psychiatrist should consider when evaluating a patient with the symptoms Lindsay had been reporting. Depression can be a major part of bipolar disorder, and people with bipolar disorder can experience self-harm ideation. In severe cases, they can die from this ideation, from self-harm. It happens, suicide. The records showed that Lindsay was repeatedly asked whether she had a plan to kill herself. including after she had reported what was described as passive suicidal ideation. Reddington then asked specifically about nurse practitioner Jolata. According to Dr. Condi's review, Jolata had considered bipolar disorder as a possible secondary or working diagnosis. There was discussion about potentially using a mood stabilizer, and ultimately, however, Lindsay was treated with Seroquel. The records also documented Lindsay complaining about how Seroquel made her feel. She frequently described feeling spacey and unlike her normal self. Dr. Condi also described her complaints of feeling hungover in the morning. Seroquel can cause drowsiness, and Dr. Condi explained that Lindsay's initial dose was being used in part as a sleep aid. But the dosage did not remain at 25 milligrams. It was eventually increased substantially, reaching 400 milligrams per day. Dr. Condi agreed that 400 milligrams was a significant increase from the original 25 milligram dose. And throughout this period, Lindsay continued complaining about the effects of the medication while also continuing to struggle with the same underlying symptoms, particularly her inability to sleep. And those problems continued through December and into her admission to McLean around the New Year's period. Even after receiving inpatient treatment at McLean, Dr. Condi testified that Lindsay continued reporting many of the same symptoms. Reddington asked whether those symptoms ever completely resolved. In January, they did not. There were periods when Lindsay appeared somewhat distressed about Dr. Condi and said that the symptoms never completely went away. The testimony then moved through Lindsay's January medication history. Dr. Condi confirmed that Lindsay saw Dr. Tufts on January 9th and was prescribed diazepam. On January 12th, Dr. Tufts prescribed 150 milligrams of trazodone. And then on January 16th, Lindsay was prescribed another medication along with 10 milligrams of amitriptyline. Dr. Condi explained that amitriptyline is an older type of antidepressant known as a tricyclic antidepressant. It tends to have more side effects than some newer antidepressants, but one of those effects can be sedation, which can sometimes be useful for someone struggling to sleep. Reddington asked whether it actually helped Lindsay sleep. Dr. Condi's answer was essentially no, it didn't. So then the discussion moved back to the DSM-5. Reddington walked through the different versions of the DSM and established that the current text revision runs more than 1,000 pages. He asked whether the DSM was essentially the Bible of psychiatry. I mean, 1,000 pages, you think of the Bible, right? Or more like a cookbook. Well, Dr. Condi didn't describe it as either. He called it a dictionary. It was essentially a collection of definitions for psychiatric disorders. Reddington then asked whether the DSM contains a specific section for postpartum psychosis. And Dr. Condi testified that postpartum psychosis is mentioned only once. And that led into the broader discussion about how postpartum psychiatric conditions are classified outside the DSM.
Now, in reference to the DSM, out of that revision, and you agree with me that they have DSM-1, DSM-2, revised, rebooted, reconsidered, DSM-3, all the way up to DSM-5 text revision, right?
Correct.
And consisting of over 1,000 pages, right?
Yes.
Is this like considered, some people say, the Bible of psychiatry, or is it like a cookbook?
I would call it a dictionary. It's a list of definitions.
If I looked under P in this dictionary, would it contain anything about postpartum psychosis for a woman?
There is one mention on page 148.
That's it.
That's it.
The rest of the world, they don't care about the DSM. They have some other
Yes.
information, right? What is that called?
The World Health Organization publishes something called the International Classification of Disease, which is now in its 11th edition. It lists postpartum psychosis as a separate entity. And that's the one that insurance companies use for billing purposes.
Right, not this.
Correct.
You familiar, sir, with the way other countries treat pregnant women in postpartum condition when they see, let me finish. when they see a doctor for medical treatment? Yes or no?
Objection.
All right, just allow that question, then we'll.
Yes.
And how does that differ from the United States of America?
Objection.
Sustained.
Go ahead.
Well, then it was time for cross-examination. So Buckingham gets up, starts by going back over Dr. Condi's qualifications. She pointed out that although he had an extensive background in child and adolescent psychiatry, his curriculum vitae didn't specifically list postpartum women as an area of experience. Condi disagreed with the suggestion that most of his work centered on child and adolescent psychiatry, explaining that he had encountered pregnant and postpartum patients during his time at the Massachusetts Mental Health Center. She also established how he became involved in Lindsay's case. His involvement had originally come through information he provided in connection with the pending civil lawsuit, rather than being brought in specifically to evaluate Lindsay for the criminal case. Condi also acknowledged that he had not reviewed police reports or photographs from the crime scene. Most of the material he relied on came from medical records, but he also said that he had personally interviewed Patrick Clancy for roughly 90 to 100 minutes. Buckingham then focused on Lindsay's treatment history and the medication she had been prescribed. Condi had testified that Lindsay was hesitant about taking medications, but Buckingham pointed out that when Lindsay first sought postpartum treatment, she went directly to a psychiatrist. Condi explained that psychiatrists are trained in psychotherapy, but can also prescribe medication. And then the discussion returned to Zoloft. Condi had testified that Lindsay experienced significant symptoms after starting and increasing the medication, and that blood testing could have provided useful information about how much medication was actually present in her system. Buckingham questioned how useful that would have been, given that Lindsay had only been taking the medication for a short period of time. Condi maintained that a blood level could still show whether the medication concentration was unusually high or low for the prescribed dose. And Buckingham also challenged Condi's characterization of some of Lindsay's symptoms, including mania and insomnia.
Now, you also spoke a little bit about Zulresso. You're aware from reviewing the records of Jennifer Tufts that she researched Zulresso and spoke about Zulresso, but never made a recommendation to the defendant that she do that injection.
Yes.
You also described that by November 21st, that the defendant was experiencing suggesting symptoms of mania, like racing thoughts. But in fact, the criteria is not just racing thoughts, it's racing thoughts, pressured speech, correct?
There are a number of criteria that are listed, but racing thoughts is one of them, yes.
Okay. And you also list, or you identify in your affidavit, extreme insomnia, but for mania, it's not just insomnia, it's that there's insomnia with a decreased need for sleep, correct?
It can be decreased feeling that you need to sleep even if you didn't sleep for several days, but it's also true that some people feel very tired. It's not just one or the other. You're
aware that the defendant denied a decreased need for sleep around that time period in November from the records, aren't you?
In that period, yes.
You also indicated that in reviewing records pertaining to, I think you noted Jennifer Tufts, that her notes were a series of the record was a series of check boxes, right? That was your testimony?
There are a few sentences, but there are mostly check boxes, yes.
And fair to say, the way in which those notes are created, there are several areas in which notes are placed at different points in those records.
There are notes at certain places, yes.
And those notes are reflective of statements that the defendant was making about her mood and how she was feeling and symptoms, correct?
Yes.
Those are all important things for a treating psychiatrist to consider when they're considering a patient's overall presentation. Is that fair to say?
Yes, fair to say.
Now, you also referenced in your affidavit that the defendant had reported that she had these increased symptoms with Zoloft and didn't sleep for 48 hours after increasing the dose. Remember that in the record?
Yes, from 25 to 50.
And you didn't review any police reports to identify that there were only 7 pills missing from that bottle of sertraline, did you?
I did not review a police report, no.
So if a person takes 7 pills over 1 week period at 25 milligrams, how do they increase the dose without more pills missing from the bottle?
Well, I believe if you took 3 or 4 pills for a few days of 25, then you still would have enough pills to take 2 25s and increase the dose to 50.
Right, but if a prescription reads that if 30 are filled and only 7 are missing from the pill bottle when it's located months later, then if you've taken 7 pills, you've taken 1 pill each day, correct?
Not necessarily. I believe that she stopped taking the medication rather quickly. And I'm not sure which pill bottle you're discussing because, as you said, I didn't review a police report.
Okay. Now, you're aware that on December 15th, that the defendant and her husband reported that she was having persistent intrusive thoughts that day, correct?
Yes,
And that's the day she first presented to Mass General Hospital.
yes,
And you're aware that Mass General Hospital is directly affiliated with McLean Hospital, right?
they are affiliated, yes.
And that she was advised to go to the inpatient program and she chose not to go.
Yes.
From reviewing the records, did you see how Letitia Dukes, a social worker or a mental health worker, from the South Shore Perinatal Behavioral Health Clinic had previously had discussions with the defendant about going to women and infants before her presentation to the Mass General ER on December 15th?
Yes,
And she didn't in fact go to that program until December 20th. Is that fair to say?
yes,
Now, you also mentioned in your review of the medications, lamotrigine. You recall that?
yes,
And that was a medication that was prescribed to the defendant in December of 2022, correct?
correct.
You're aware that she never took lamotrigine.
I believe that's what she said, yes.
They then returned to Seroquel, which had initially been prescribed at 25 milligrams. And Condi agreed that 25 milligrams was a relatively low dose commonly used for sleep. So for someone being treated with suspected bipolar disorder, however, therapeutic doses could be substantially higher, potentially reaching several hundred milligrams. Buckingham said that Rebecca Gelada had considered bipolar disorder as a possibility in Lindsay's case and had recommended gradually increasing the Seroquel when the lower dose wasn't providing enough relief. The goal, according to the records, had eventually been 400 milligrams, but Condi couldn't say whether Lindsay ever actually reached that 400 milligram dose. He did agree that once Lindsay began reporting problems and concerns about Seroquel, she asked to taper off of it. And before Lindsay's eventual admission to McLean, Gelada had sent in a prescription that allowed Lindsay to gradually reduce the medication. Buckingham continued by focusing on what happened with the Seroquel once Lindsay was admitted to McLean on January 1st. And by the time Lindsay arrived at McLean, she was already tapering down from the medication and was taking approximately 100 milligrams at night. The hospital continued to taper immediately. Her first night there, the dose was reduced to about 75 milligrams. And by the time she was discharged, she was no longer taking Seroquel. They also discussed amitriptyline. Condi wasn't certain whether Lindsay actually left McLean with a prescription for it, but the records showed that it had been recommended. And by January 12th, the active prescriptions listed for Lindsay were amitriptyline, Valium as needed, and trazodone. Buckingham clarified that Lindsay had not been taking every medication that had come up during the testimony all at once. Condi agreed. At most, she had generally been taking around 3 medications at a time, possibly 4 at one point. Ativan also came up. Lindsay had expressed some interest in returning to it because it helped with her anxiety, although Condi pointed out that she was conflicted about the medication because she was worried she'd become dependent on it. Still, when she took Ativan, she reported feeling less anxious. The final portion of Buckingham's questioning focused on the auditory hallucinations Condi had discussed during direct examination. Although Lindsay had eventually reported hearing a voice, Condi acknowledged that she had not reported that symptom to Dr. Tufts. She had not told Rebecca Gelada either, and she had not reported hearing a voice to Letitia Dukes. The only documented report of Lindsay hearing a voice came on January 24th, 2023, that day that she killed her children. And after that, Buckingham had no further questions. But that doesn't mean Reddington didn't. Reddington had a few follow-up questions, and he returned to the issue of Lindsay reporting that she heard a voice. The defense had established that she hadn't told Dr. Tufts or Rebecca Gelada about that symptom at the time. Reddington asked whether there could be a reason for patients that might minimize or withhold something that's serious from a provider. Take a listen.
Would you agree that there are reasons that a woman would not tell the doctor or minimize their symptoms out of fear?
Yes.
What kind of fear? Fear of what?
Well, in the records, it's stated that Ms. Clancy reported she was worried that her children would be taken away from her, perhaps by the Department of Children and Families, if she reported very severe symptoms. The other thing is, as a health care professional, boards of registration sometimes take a dim view of people who have been in treatment for certain psychiatric illnesses. And so she might have been concerned about her nursing license, but that's speculation.
So there are other reasons why a person may be concerned about telling healthcare providers, mandated reporters, that they're hearing voices, correct?
Yes.
Would you agree with me that you don't have to see the proverbial unicorn in the corner to your health provider to be suffering from psychosis?
Yes, that's true.
And can you tell us, counsel was asking about the symptomology, psychosis, is that something that just grinds on for day after week after month, or is that something that comes on out of nowhere very quickly?
No, overall.
It can be quite episodic.
What does that mean?
It means that an episode can start and stop, and then an interval of time goes by. It could be days, weeks, or months, and then another episode occurs.
Counsel asked you about bipolar disorder, the suspicions of bipolar disorder from Dr. Gelada, and then talked about the prescriptions that were prescribed. Is it, in your opinion, appropriate to prescribe a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor to a person that is bipolar?
Overall.
It would be considered something to be done cautiously and usually with a mood stabilizer begun at the same time to prevent the possibility of making manic symptoms worse.
Buckingham briefly followed up. She pointed out that Condi had never interviewed Lindsay herself, so he couldn't actually know what she had been afraid of when she didn't disclose certain symptoms. Condi agreed that his explanation about her fears was speculative. Buckingham then made one final point. If someone was begging for help, wouldn't it be important for the person to be honest with their providers about what they were feeling, seeing, and hearing? Condi agreed that it should be, but noted that patients do not always tell their doctors everything that they are experiencing. And after that, there were no further questions, and court broke for lunch. And yeah, we're just at lunch, guys. So I hope you guys have your snacks and your out and your drinks, because we're lunch breaking it right now. But after lunch, luckily here you get a full recap without having to take a break. So after lunch, we just get to skip over that lunch break. The next defense witness was Dr. Elizabeth Laposata, who testified on Zoom. And Dr. Laposata explained that she's a medical doctor who specializes in anatomic and forensic pathology. Her work involves reviewing cases to understand how people were injured and how people died. And in 1983, she became board certified by the American Board of Pathology in both anatomic and forensic pathology. Her career has included positions at St. Louis University School of Medicine, where she was also an assistant medical examiner for the city of St. Louis. She later moved to Philadelphia and ran the autopsy service at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, where she also taught forensic pathology to medical students and conducted research. She has also served as the medical examiner for the city of Philadelphia and as an assistant medical examiner for the state of Delaware. She's kind of smart. I mean, I'm impressed. She got me. Then in 1993, she was selected as the chief medical examiner for the state of Rhode Island, and she held that position until 2005, when she started her own independent consulting practice. And so, Reddington confirmed that since then, she has continued reviewing cases and testifying in court as an independent consultant. And you might recognize her from the Karen Reed trial and the Karen Reed case. So, for this case, though, in this trial, Reddington reached out to her and asked her to review the discovery in the Commonwealth's case against Lindsay Clancy. And Dr. Laposata explained that she had reviewed a large amount of material, including the medical examiner's office file, EMS records, hospital records, police reports, and medical reports. She also reviewed grand jury minutes and approximately 500 photographs, including crime scene photos and photos taken of Lindsay at the hospital. So Reddington also established that Dr. Laposata had worked with a graphics person named Jeffrey Drake to create illustrations that would help explain her opinion to the jury. And those diagrams, they were emitted to the jurors so they could follow along as she testified. The testimony then turned to the children. Dr. Laposata confirmed that she had reviewed medical records, photographs, and autopsy reports involving Dawson, Cora, and Callan. Reddington asked specifically about the autopsy photographs and whether throughout her career she had seen photographs of infants, young children, and adults both before and during autopsies, and she said she had many, many times. That experience became relevant when Reddington asked about what had been described to the jury as bruises on the children's bodies. Dr. Laposata testified that some of the bruising seen in the photographs was consistent with normal injuries that could happen to active children who were running and jumping. She then focused on the infant Callan and some of the marks visible on his head. According to Dr. Laposata, while Callan was hospitalized, doctors had placed small monitoring devices on both sides of his head to track his brain activity. The devices were round and cup-like, and she said they could leave small marks on the skin where they had been attached. She also noted other marks that were associated with medical treatment, including puncture wounds. Reddington asked whether fluid on the surface of the skin could also potentially be mistaken for bruising in a photograph. Dr. Laposata said that was possible, and if there was liquid or a small amount of blood sitting on the surface of the skin, it could appear like a mark in a photograph, but could potentially be wiped away. And in her opinion, the marks on the infant's head that Dr. Laposata attributed to the monitoring equipment was not evidence that somebody had squeezed, beaten, or pushed the child. The questioning then moved to Lindsay herself. Dr. Laposata had reviewed Lindsay's medical records from both South Shore Hospital and Brigham and Women's Hospital, including the injuries to her wrists and neck. She described the injuries as sharp force injuries. Reddington asked about her experience seeing self-inflicted wounds to the wrists and neck in other self-harming attempts. Dr. Laposata said that she had seen that type of injury many times throughout her career. Reddington began asking whether Lindsay's particular injuries were consistent with someone attempting to kill herself But the prosecution objected before she could fully answer that question. So instead, Riddington went through the individual wounds and the charts and diagrams the La Posada had prepared.
Time.
And can you tell the jury, to your opinion, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, as to the nature of these injuries, and are they consistent with somebody trying, in your opinion, wait a minute, trying to kill themselves?
Sustained.
So you would agree that there's an injury to the left wrist, injury to the right wrist, that's a sharp incised wound, is that correct?
Yes, they're cutting type wounds made by a sharp object such as a knife.
Okay. And how about the neck? Did that penetrate the fascia, or did that penetrate the skin? To what degree?
Yes, there were also linear, superficial incised wounds to her neck, and there were several of them, and one or two of them went deeper. There was bleeding also from the wounds on her wrist, and there were numerous attempts at cutting the skin, which we call hesitation marks, which are a classic finding in suicide attempts. And they did, those incisions did cut in through the skin and cut blood vessels that were under the skin. And you can also tell from looking at the photos of Lindsay taken in the hospital when she was first admitted, and also when the photograph of the bedroom, her bedroom, you could see there was significant bloodshed event from those cutting injuries.
Now, did she also sustain an injury to her neck from your review of the medical records?
Yes.
Can you tell us what type of injury, and if we could, and if it assists the jury with you, you can make reference to the pages of the little report and the diagrams, page 4, 5, and 6, and tell us what we're looking at.
Okay, let's see. So are we ready to look at number 4?
Sure, yep, start off with 4.
Okay. So
Just so you know, I think that's the first page that you have, so just.
yes, that's right. Yes, page 4 is actually page 1. Yes, so what we have here is to show you how Lindsay was injured. And I got this from the scene photographs, from all her medical history, and my knowledge and training, understanding how injuries happen to the body. So if we look at the left-hand side of this panel, we see a depiction of the back side of the house, and the top window on the second floor is open. That's where she would have put her palms down on the windowsill and put her head out and precipitated down to fall on the hard frozen ground. During her fall, head first, she had cuts on her wrists, which were bleeding, and her coming head down on the side of that building would then transfer some of that blood onto the side of the building, which was found in the scene photograph. She then hits really head first, and as her body descends that 13 or 14 feet. And if you look at the, so she really did a free fall dive head first. Then if you look on the right upper 2 diagrams that just show a skull, this illustrates the forces then that were applied to Lindsay's head from hitting the ground and then her head bending a little bit. And what she got from that is what we call a characteristic burst fracture or a Jefferson fracture. And this is a fracture that we see with people who hit their head on, like if they've taken a dive into a swimming pool and they hit their head on the bottom. It's a classic finding in people who have energy applied to the falling head. And what it does is that it takes the first cervical vertebrae, which kind of looks like a donut, as you see up there in the middle, and it squashes it. The base of the skull then squashes that. and then like a donut, it kind of spreads it out. And she had 6 or 7 fractures of that cervical vertebrae, number 1, the ring of that. And the fractures I have pointed to there with arrows. So that is called the characteristic Jefferson fracture from hitting your head, the top of your head, in a dive first position. So you could also describe it as a bursting type fracture. But you don't get any spinal cord injury from that because the area, the hole in the middle is pretty big. So it just crushes down on the sides and fractures the ring around the spinal cord. So that tells me immediately that she landed head first and went down the window, went down head first. Then the energy is transmitted then from her head down her vertebral body, down the bony spine. And that then fractured and compressed C1, the lower right-hand panel there, puts that cervical vertebral body in the context of the rest of her skeleton. The left upper hand, we see her jaw, and then the C1 is pointed out there, and there are little springs there to indicate they were squished and compressed together and fractured.
Now, looking at the next page, which would be 5, does that assist us in looking at the illustration of the injury to the spine?
Yeah, so this is after her head hits, so she hits her head first, then there is some flexion of her body, and the energy from the impact is transmitted down her vertebral column. And what that did was it crushed the number of her thoracic vertebrae or vertebrae in the chest area, and actually made thoracic vertebral body T5 be compressed and move over the top of the lower vertebrae, and that is what injured her spinal cord. In the right-hand panel there, the yellow tube coming down is the spinal cord, and the thoracic vertebral 5 and 6 is pictured there, and you can see that her whole spinal column was compressed and it moved forward and out of place, causing her spinal cord injury. There were also injuries that are indicated by little red stars there, and those are fractures of the transverse processes of the cervical vertebrae. So when they were compressed, the areas where the joints are between the vertebrae were compressed and fractured those transverse processes. So she had a bending injury, and she also had a right posterior rib injury. You can see on the left-hand panel, her shoulders are also hitting the ground, and that caused a fracture of the right first rib in the back, and the flexion of her neck also damaged her thyroid gland and some of her voice box cartilages.
And if we look at panel page 6, can you tell us what we're looking at there?
Yes, this is the final resting position of Lindsay's body. It's documenting all the materials I reviewed that are on the left-hand side. So she is lying down on hard, frozen ground. Her clothing is wet. She has on indoor clothing. The time that this occurred, it was dark and no sun. The temperature was in the low 30s. So she is going to be at risk of her body temperature going down, lying on that cold ground. In addition to, now that her thoracic chest spine is fractured, that has totally disrupted the thermal regulation of the bottom half of her body. So she is going to lose heat from the lower half of her body and to approach ambient temperature. So there she is lying there on the ground. Then if we go to the right side of that, this is a scene photograph showing the area where Lindsay's body landed. You can see on the right at the base area, there is some medical debris from the EMS emergency treatment. Then circled in or put in a red square is a little bit of snow that has some blood on it, which would correspond to her position lying down as we see it in the left-hand side there.
And sorry, go ahead.
Okay, then the last bit here is a X-ray of Lindsay, which was taken in early February after she had surgical stabilization of her fractured spine. So this is looking at the side of her, and you can see the hardware, which they look like little golf tees going to the left side. So this is the surgical metal hardware that was placed in her spine to open up and align her spine to try to preserve any function that was still available.
Now, doctor, when she went to the Brigham and Women's Hospital, were you reviewing the medical records and able to discern that she actually coded as a result of her injuries?
Yes, she did. She was in spinal shock and hypothermia, and her heart did stop.
And did you observe that there were, and I quote, massive blood transfusions to treat her at Brigham and Women's?
Yeah, she lost a lot of blood around the muscles that hold the spine up because that was so damaged. So her hemoglobin and hematocrit and her red blood cell level was very low on admission.
And the final question I have, doctor, is as it relates to the records, it showed that she had a core body temperature of 82 degrees as opposed to 98.6, which we're accustomed to. Can you tell the jury, in your opinion, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, what does that mean and how did that happen? I mean, that's pretty low.
Yes, that is low. That's like, 16 degrees below normal. And so her low body temperature came from lying on the hard frozen ground, which would be 32 degrees frozen ground. She had wet clothing on. So wet clothing is going to transmit the body heat into the atmosphere quicker than dry clothing. It was indoor clothes. She didn't have a big parka on. There was no sun at that time to keep her body temperature up. The ambient or the air temperature was around 30 degrees. She has a thin body. And also, most importantly, because of that thoracic spinal cord transection, she lost the ability to control her body temperature below that level. So that means all her blood vessels just dilate and they just lose heat to the atmosphere.
Thank you very much, doctor.
So then we have cross-examination with Sprague. Sprague first went after Dr. LaPosada's professional history. What is typical, right? She established that she had been the head of the Rhode Island office of the chief medical examiner when the office was cited for a number of violations related to unsafe conditions. LaPosada said that those violations had been minimal and that the inspection had been about 20 years earlier. Sprague then pointed out that Dr. LaPosada had never treated Lindsay or personally examined her. She agreed with that. From there, Sprague returned to the Jefferson fracture. Dr. LaPosada had testified that Lindsay's C1 burst fracture was characteristic of somebody landing directly on the top of their head. Sprague challenged that conclusion, asking whether the same type of fracture could also happen if someone struck the back of their head or the top of their shoulders. She disagreed. Sprague then laid out the scenario Dr. LaPosada was proposing. Lindsay had supposedly fallen approximately 13 feet from a second-story windowsill on hard frozen ground, landing on the top of her head, and that impact, according to LaPosada, had been powerful enough to burst the C1 vertebrae, fracture other vertebrae, and break ribs. But Sprague pointed out that Lindsay didn't actually have an obvious head injury.
Yes, just the force of a free-falling body, yes.
Okay, but she had no injuries to her head, correct?
I'm sure she had bruising to her scalp under her hair.
You're sure?
She did not have a skull fracture.
Right, she didn't have a skull fracture, correct?
Yes.
She didn't have any cuts or things that needed sutures, correct?
She needed sutures in the cutting wounds on her wrist.
Well, we're talking about her head right now. She didn't need any sutures on her head, correct?
Correct.
She didn't have any large dents in her head, correct?
Large dents? What do you mean?
From hitting the frozen ground head first, there were no dents or bumps or sutures required on her head, correct?
Her scalp was intact. The forces were transmitted to C1.
So through her head,
A very common finding when you go head first and hit your head.
so hitting the frozen ground, the icy frozen ground, not a bump or scratch or scrape on her top of her head. And then within her head, there was no brain bleed, there was no hemorrhaging, there was no injury into her brain itself. Nothing showed up on the CT scans, correct?
Correct. Her brain was fine. Her skull was fine. I'm sure she probably had some scalp bruising under her hair.
You're sure because that goes along with what you're guessing at how the fall happened, correct? You can't be sure because
No.
you didn't see the head, correct? You say
No,
you're
I
sure,
can
but
be
you didn't see her head.
I saw the medical records and I examined all of those. I'm sure she had some bruise on the top of her head to the backside, as I showed in my diagram number 4. I'm sure there was some bruising on her scalp under her hair, but that was not a major concern at the time she was taken into the hospital.
You keep saying you're sure there were bruises, that you're sure that there was this or that that's not shown in any photographs or medical evidence. So you're not sure, are you? You're assuming.
No, I'm sure.
Okay. Let me show you some photographs here.
Excuse me. No,
No,
yes.
and let me show you, I'm asking the questions. Let me show you some photographs
okay, go
here.
ahead.
Let me show you some photographs of the defendant that were taken at the hospital of her head. Show them. Do we have sharing privileges on the computer?
I mean, whatever you want, we'll do it.
Showing you here, photo of the top of the defendant's head. No
Yes, I see that.
cuts, no swelling, correct?
Oh, we just see her hair.
There's no blood on the white sheet, correct?
Well, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what you just asked me.
There's no blood on that very white sheet, correct?
Well, I don't see what's under her head, but that's not relevant to understanding that she did fall head first.
Okay, so you're saying she fell head first from 13 feet onto hard frozen ground and had no visible injuries to the exterior of her head.
Yes.
And
I'm
you're
sure
saying that
there was
she-
excuse me, I'm
It was a
sure
yes
there
or no
was some
question,
bruise.
Doctor.
Listen, hold on. Doctor, listen to the question, answer the question, and then we'll just go from there. Go ahead. Ms. Sprague, if
Okay.
you want, Ms.
Thank
Sprague, if you want to
you.
re-ask that question.
Doctor, yes or no, she fell to the ground, frozen ground, and that had no apparent injury to the exterior of her head, correct?
Correct. As we
And
see there.
she fell head first to the frozen ground and not with enough force to break several vertebrae in her ribs, but did not have a skull fracture, a brain bleed, or anything else, any other type of injury to her head, correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Quite the heated exchange, right? And honestly, for those that are our podcast listeners listening on Apple, we did see a picture of Lindsay in the hospital with her hair and showing the top of her head. The sheets were white, somebody pointed out, as in no blood was on the sheets, but you couldn't see her head because of her hair. All we could see was her hair. So I don't know how we would see bruising on her hair, just letting, we know what we saw. But you're right, we didn't see blood or anything in her hair. We didn't see any blood around her head. I don't know. Anyway, just a little trigger warning now, because after that, the questioning moved away from Lindsay's fall toward the strangulation of the children. So trigger warning there. Sprague brought up a report Dr. Laposada had prepared for the defense. And in that report, Laposada had written that it could take approximately 5 to 10 seconds for someone to lose consciousness from strangulation. Sprague then asked whether Laposada remembered testifying in a 2011 case in Rhode Island involving a woman who had killed her 8-year-old daughter. And at first, Laposada says she did not remember. Well, so Sprague reminded her of the case and identified it as State of Rhode Island versus Kimberly Fry. And that seemed to jog her memory. And Laposada said that that case involved manual strangulation. Sprague then read from Laposada's prior testimony back in 2011. And Laposada had testified that if the blood vessels in the neck were completely compressed, a person could become unconscious within approximately 10 to 20 seconds. She had also explained that if the pressure wasn't applied effectively and continuously, particularly when someone was struggling, it could take longer. So Sprague pointed out that this was different from the 5 to 10 second time frame Laposada had given in the Clancy case. So Laposada tried to explain that the Fry case involved a different type of strangulation, but Sprague wasn't letting her move past the prior testimony that easily.
Now, do you recall testifying previously in State of Rhode Island versus Kimberly Fry, case number W1/2010-0413A? Do you recall testifying previously in that case?
No, I don't.
Let me refresh your memory. It was a woman who had killed her 8-year-old daughter by asphyxia, and you testified.
Oh, yes, she started manual strangulation, yes.
Yeah, so ring a bell?
Yes.
Okay. And so you testified back in 2011 in that case, and you were asked if you have a very complete compression, strike that. You were asked, unconsciousness due to oxygenation can occur within 10 to 20 seconds. And you said if you have a very complete compression of the blood vessels of the neck, you can become unconscious within 10 to 20 seconds. And then you were asked, I'm just saying hypothetically, just strangulation alone is 10 to 20 seconds. And you said if it is effectively and continuously applied, like in a lateral vascular neck restraint, most times there's a struggle going on, so you can't quite get that. So in that case there, you didn't testify that it was 5 to 10 seconds. You testified that it was 10 to 20 seconds, and that if there's any struggling, it could be longer, correct?
Yes, but that case was.
Well, that was a yes or no question.
It's not a yes or no question.
All right,
Defense can follow up.
hold on. She's answered the question, and then we'll have a redirect if counsel would like to.
Well, I don't remember
Hold on,
what
Doctor.
I said.
Why don't you,
I'm
Doctor,
sorry.
wait for a question.
You were also asked in that same trial, doctor, the question put to you in that trial was, but once that unconsciousness set in, you agree with me that there had to have been a consistent application of pressure, either suffocation, strangulation, or compressions of the chest for 2 to 3 more minutes continuously while the child was unconscious, correct? And you answered, I think that's a fair statement. And the question was, you said that before yourself, correct? And you answered yes. And then the question was, I'm asking your opinion. And you said, the question was, after Camden became unconscious, after 2 to 3 minutes of continuous application of one of those 3, and you answered correct. Is that right?
I have no memory of that. I'm sure you're reading it correctly.
Well, you have memory of your medical knowledge, correct?
Sure, sure I have memory of my medical knowledge.
And so at that point in time, in 2011, you testified that you would have to strangle someone 10 to 20 seconds at least to unconsciousness, and then you would have to continue to strangle them for 2 to 3 minutes for death to occur. And you said correct. Is that still your medical knowledge?
That's a different case. That was not ligature, that was a manual.
So either way, you're talking about the compression of the neck causing a loss of oxygen and blood, correct?
Yeah, I'll allow this question. Go ahead.
Yeah, there are many ways that can occur, and the way the pressure is applied is very important in understanding how long it takes to become unconscious. These are the children here were the victims of what we call ligature strangulation. The Fry case that's coming back to me a little now, that was a manual strangulation and also a body compression, which is a totally different type of asphyxia.
I mean, you were asked about that in that case, and you were asked, but once unconsciousness has set in, you agree with me that there has to be consistent application of pressure, either suffocation, strangulation, or compressions for 2 to 3 minutes more, and you answered correct. So not all three, you said either one of those could cause death after 3 minutes, correct?
Yeah, just if you could rephrase that question.
You were asked, but once unconsciousness set in, you agree with me that there had to have been consistent application of pressure, either suffocation, strangulation, or compressions of the chest for 2 to 3 minutes more continuously while they're unconscious. And you said, I think that's a fair statement. So that's what you said, correct?
No, yes, in order to become dead, brain dead, you need the physiology is that you become unconscious within 5 to 10 seconds, and then you're unconscious, but that's not dead. Then that continued constriction of the blood flow has to be still continuously applied for the brain to die.
Correct. So
that is what happens, and that's what happened to the Clancy children. The ligatures were wrapped around, they went unconscious in 5 to 10, maybe 20 seconds. Probably less than 20 seconds because it was a ligature, not a manual strangulation. So it was immediately compressed, unconsciousness within 10 seconds, and then death within 5 to 10 minutes after that.
with continuous pressure, pressure around the neck.
Yes, because this is a ligature strangulation.
Thank you.
Not manual.
It's hard to hear, for me at least. On redirect, Reddington went back to the distinction Dr. LaPosada had made between manual strangulation and ligature strangulation. LaPosada explained that you saw that manual strangulation involves someone using their hands to apply pressure, where ligature is different. It's around the neck that compressed blood vessels. So she explains the difference between the physiology behind strangulation and and how the oxygenated blood flows towards the brain, while the jugular veins were responsible for draining blood away. And when the veins are compressed, blood could not properly leave the brain. With enough continued pressure, the blood flow became completely restricted, and the person eventually lost consciousness. So according to LaPosada, the difference between the two methods was how consistently that pressure could be maintained, right? And a ligature is different. Using a round elastic exercise band, in this case, as an example, LaPosada said the bands created or could create immediate and relatively consistent compression once they were wrapped around the necks. There wasn't somebody's hand repeatedly tightening or loosening its grip. She testified that this type of ligature strangulation could cause unconsciousness within approximately 4 to 10 seconds. I can only hope, honestly. Reddington then asked about another distinction between manual and ligature. Manual strangulation fractures the hyoid bone, and that could occur. LaPosada agreed, explaining that the hyoid is a small U-shaped bone located beneath the jaw, and that fractures could occur when someone was strangled by hand. Ultimately, both mechanisms could lead to brain death because the brain was deprived of oxygen, but the process leading to that outcome was different. Reddington then returned to the prior Rhode Island case that Sprague had questioned her about, the earlier case that had involved manual strangulation, along with testimony about suffocation and compression of the chest. Reddington asked whether those mechanisms had anything to do with the ligature strangulation involved in the Clancy case. And La Posada said they did not, and in her opinion, it was a completely different mechanism of injury. Well, Sprague briefly followed up. She asked Dr. La Posada to confirm the point she had made during redirect, that with ligature strangulation, the person would lose consciousness, but the pressure still had to remain continuously applied for several minutes for death to occur. La Posada agreed. Reddington then came back for one more question. He asked whether someone would have needed to physically remain over the victim and continue applying pressure to the ligature, or whether the ligature could simply be left around the person's neck. And La Posada said the latter was possible. In this case, she described the band as elastic, round loops that were wrapped tightly enough around the neck to pinch the skin. And once they were in place, they could remain there without anyone continuing to hold them. According to her, the bands could maintain compression of the blood vessels and remain in place while death occurred minutes later. Then Sprague got back up again. She asked the doctor whether she'd actually seen the exercise bands. She said yes. Sprague established that the bands were long pieces with handles on each end and that they were round rather than flat. She then asked whether the doctor understood the bands had been wrapped around each child's neck and used to strangle and used to strangle them. La Posada said they had been wrapped several times and firmly enough to close off the jugular veins. Sprague then focused on something La Posada had not actually established from her own examination. She asked whether there had been any testimony or evidence showing that the bands had been knotted and left around the children's necks. Well, the doctor said the presence or absence of a knot was not important to her conclusion. What mattered was that the bands had been wrapped securely around the neck several times. She said that she could determine that from the appearance of the skin. That's how she could tell. Well, then that made Sprague literally bring out the actual exercise bands. Watch this.
They weren't tied in a knot and left around their necks, according to any of the evidence, correct?
The important part to me was they were wrapped several times, and then whether it had a bow or a knot would not really be important. It was secure and wrapped around the neck several times. And I can tell that from the appearance of the skin on the neck that goes up.
Showing you the band, doctor, wrapped around the child's neck several times and then left there. I guess you can't see it from where you are, but it just fell
No,
apart. It didn't stay in a circle.
Yeah, I sort of saw what you did, so
What was that?
I said I saw that.
You saw it. So it was left there and it fell apart, correct?
Yeah, what you just did, sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
That was heartbreaking. I guess someone said they didn't understand what that demonstration was for. I don't completely either. We can only guess, but I think it was to show that this was not quick and that Lindsay had to try really hard to strangle her children. I think that's what she was attempting the prosecution to show. Anyway, after that, there were no further questions. And then the last defense witness of the day was probably the most important witness we'd heard from so far. We started with something he said on the stand. It was Dr. Paul Zeisel, the Dr. Zeisel. We've heard about him throughout this trial, star witness for the defense, and honestly, someone that the prosecution has really tried to discredit. Well, all right. Reddington began by going through Dr. Zeisel's background. He explained that he is a clinical and forensic psychologist, just like my co-host, Dr. John Matthias, and with a bachelor's degree from Queens College and a master's from Harvard University and a doctorate in clinical psychology from William James College. He'd been licensed for 37 years and had worked as a forensic psychologist for more than 1,000 cases. He had testified for both the Commonwealth and defendants, and he had also qualified to testify in virtually every court in Massachusetts. But his experience went far beyond the courtroom. Dr. Zeisel spent several years working in Afghanistan as a federal contractor for the State Department. And then from late 2007 until early 2011, he worked essentially as what he described as a combat psychologist. Wow, can you imagine the PTSD he's dealing with? He was embedded in the field and worked with multinational military forces from dozens of countries. And when troops were involved in combat incidents, he could be sent out to conduct what they were called critical incident debriefings. And sometimes that meant getting on a helicopter and flying out to troops who had just survived an attack. His job was to evaluate them, help them process what had happened, and determine whether they were psychologically stable enough to continue serving in a war zone. He also evaluated service members who were struggling to function safely in that environment. And that included violence assessments and determining whether someone was psychologically fit to continue working in an environment where carrying weapons was part of everyday life. Wow. He was also loaned out to agencies, including the U.S. Marshals, FBI, and CIA, where he dealt with the psychological effects of people being injured, killing others in self-defense, deaths of colleagues, and the trauma that could follow in those experiences that sometimes involved death notifications, helping resolve conflicts between soldiers and contractors, and assisting people who need to be removed from the war zone for psychological reasons. He described being sent to extremely remote locations called forward operating bases, as well as combat outposts that could be isolated on mountainsides and reached by walking along goat trails. Some of these locations had little more than tents and basic living quarters with no electricity. He also participated in numerous dismounted patrols because having someone trained in psychology with the troops could provide support and help them understand what they were experiencing while living and fighting in a war zone. Reddington then clarified the basic difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist goes through medical school and then completes a medical residency, while psychologists receive graduate level training in psychology. Psychologists can provide therapy, conduct psychological testing, and evaluate mental health conditions, among many other areas of practice. One important distinction was that psychologists generally cannot prescribe medication. There are some exceptions within the military, but for the vast majority of psychologists, prescribing medication is not part of their practice. And that led into the psychological testing Dr. Zeisel had experience with. He explained that testing could be used for all kinds of purposes, from evaluating cognitive functioning to ADHD to neuropsychological testing, forensic evaluations, custody matters, guardianship, and risk assessment. And forensic psychology specifically involved the intersection of mental health and the law. That could include evaluating issues like deception, malingering, which is lying, personality characteristics, and antisocial personality disorder, as well as determining whether someone might pose a risk in certain government, military, or law enforcement positions. And this is important because there's a lot of question for Lindsay about who she is, right? Truly behind the scenes. So Reddington brought up a test that would become particularly important to understanding Dr. Zeisel's testimony, the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, and it has been around since the 1940s and has gone through several different versions over the years. Modern versions used much more diverse populations than the original testing samples. Dr. Zeisel explained that the test included validity scales designed to help determine how a person was approaching the test and whether they might be presenting themselves in a particular way. And that included what was commonly referred to as the lie scale, which could help identify certain types of dishonest responding, malingering. But there was another important concept here. The idea of someone trying to fake good or fake bad. Someone might fake good because they wanted to appear healthier, right? Or more stable than they actually were. Think of custody battles, right? Dr. Zeisel gave the example of a mother whose children, oh, there you go, yeah, had, been taken away, right? Who wanted to get them back. She could have had the incentive to present herself as the healthiest person possible. Bingo. On the other hand, someone could fake bad by exaggerating psychological or physical problems because they believed doing so could benefit them, such as in workers' compensation claims. That explanation of psychological testing was important because Reddington was beginning to establish what Dr. Zeisel was trained and educated to evaluate with experience and what the testing could reveal when someone's own presentation of their symptoms might not tell the whole story. And so, Reddington applied everything that Dr. Zeisel had just explained to Lindsay's case. He asked whether in a murder case, the MMPI could potentially help a psychologist determine whether a defendant was pretending to have a mental disease or defect. And Dr. Zeisel said it could. And in Lindsay's case, the government's doctors had administered an MMPI to her as part of their evaluation. And Dr. Zeisel examined it. He had reviewed both the test results and the government psychologist's interpretation of them when forming his own opinion. Reddington wanted to know the most important part, whether Dr. Zeisel believed Lindsay had been malingering, meaning lying or exaggerating her symptoms during that evaluation.
Yes or no answers would be fine. Were you aware that a test was administered by the government's doctor, I think it was Dr. Helbrin, to Lindsay Clancy in the course of the government's evaluation?
Yes.
And did you consider the results in the interpretation of that test as part of your opinion for this jury?
Yes.
And to that extent, as you discuss whether or not somebody is faking or somebody is exaggerating, do you have an opinion based upon your review of the discovery in the case to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether or not Lindsay Clancy in the course of that evaluation was malingering or lying or exaggerating?
Yes, I do.
Tell the jury.
My opinion in the testing of Ms. Clancy regarding the MMPI was that
Objection.
Just the doctor, your opinion, doctor.
she was not faking. There was no evidence of any malingering. She presented as an honest citizen.
Okay.
Well, from there, Reddington went back to the beginning of Dr. Zeisel's involvement in the case, and he testified that he received a phone call from Reddington late on the night of February 3rd, 2023. It was around 11:30 at night. This was just like a week or so, a little more, I guess, after the horrific night. And Dr. Zeisel was already in bed when the phone rang. Reddington told him that he was representing Lindsay Clancy, a young woman who had been severely injured and was hospitalized. And the very next morning, Dr. Zeisel went to Brigham and Women's Hospital. He arrived at the front desk and explained that Reddington had asked him to evaluate Lindsay in the surgical ICU. At first, he was not allowed into the unit. He was told he had to wait for about 30 minutes. Eventually, Reddington contacted the hospital's chief counsel, and Dr. Zeisel was given access. He was able to see Lindsay around 12:30 that afternoon on February 4th. That was 11 days. Okay, so 11 days after January 24th. Dr. Zeisel also confirmed that a court order was ultimately needed for him to gain access to Lindsay at the hospital. And while he first saw her, she looked much like the photographs the jury has already seen, lying in a hospital bed surrounded by tubes and medical equipment. But there was another detail. Lindsay's right arm was shackled to the bed with what Dr. Zeisel described as regular metal handcuffs. She wasn't restrained with some soft medical device. These were actual handcuffs. At the time, Lindsay still had tubes and wires attached as she received treatment in the intensive care unit, although she was no longer intubated. That meant she was able to speak. She could not get up, though, and according to Dr. Zeisel, she couldn't move anything below her sternum. Reddington then explained why he had sent Dr. Zeisel to the hospital in the first place. He was concerned about Lindsay's mental health after what had happened just days earlier. There was also another issue, that Lindsay had essentially been completely isolated. She was not allowed visitors, no family, no friends, not even a priest. Dr. Zeisel went in to speak with her and performed what he described as a brief mental status examination. He checked whether she knew who she was, where she was, and what time it was. Lindsay knew who she was, but she did not know where she was and was not completely sure what time it was. She told him that she remembered what happened, but her memory was very fuzzy and foggy. That's in quotes. Dr. Zeisel explained that she had been receiving significant pain medication following surgery, which was something that he took into consideration when speaking with her. And then Reddington asked whether Lindsay had expressed concern about her husband, Patrick.
And during the course of that interview with her, did she express any concern to you about her husband, Patrick?
Yes, she did.
Tell the jurors what she indicated to you.
She said, since 11 days prior to my meeting with her, which would have been January 24th, 2023, she had no contact with Patrick. She wanted to know how he was doing. She wanted to know if she could call him and find out where things are with her and with him and how he was faring, and to just speak with him.
She expressed concern about her family.
Yes, she did.
Did she express concern about what had happened?
Yes.
Did she ask you, or did you offer to her the ability to speak to her husband, Patrick?
She asked me if she could use my cell phone to call her husband.
Did she do that?
Yes, she did.
Did you hear the conversation?
Yes, I told her we'd call. It would have to be on speakerphone.
And tell us about that conversation.
So that first phone call, I believe on the 24th, he did not pick up. She left a message. I did not leave a message. We then called back 2 days later on the 6th.
And after the 2 days had transpired and the call was made on the 6th, did she have a chance to talk to Patrick?
Yes.
Were you there?
Yes.
Was she still chained to the bed?
Yes.
Were the cops still outside the room?
Yes, not in blues. They were in civilian clothing, jeans, flannel shirts.
And tell us what she said to Patrick in your presence on the speakerphone at that point.
She had told Patrick that she loved him very much. She was unable to express a lot of emotion, but she expressed love for him. And she had said that she heard a male voice ordering her, telling her that she didn't have any choice, but she had to kill her children and then kill herself.
Now, doctor, have in mind your background, your career, Did you tell Lindsay Clancy to lie or make that up and pretend that she was hearing voices?
No.
you have any conversation or any suggestions to her at all that she should say she heard voices or anything like that?
Absolutely not.
Why did you let her call her husband on your cell phone?
I let her call her husband out of human compassion.
Wow. I let her call her husband out of human compassion. Reddington then established that he and Dr. Zeisel had known each other for about 20 years. Dr. Zeisel had testified for him in other cases, and the two had also socialized together. They were friends. But Dr. Zeisel explained that his work on Lindsay's case went far beyond those personal connections. He had access to the massive amount of information that allowed him to conduct his own evaluation. That included Lindsay's clinical records, emergency room records, grand jury testimony, and records from multiple hospitals. He also reviewed medical records covering the period from shortly after the January 24th incident through the time of trial. And by the time he prepared his report for Reddington in June, Dr. Zeisel had met with Lindsay more than 45 times. And then even after the report was completed, he continued seeing her. He estimated another 15 to 20 meetings, including meetings at Tewksbury Hospital, meetings in the courthouse holding area, and his observations of her during the ongoing court proceedings. At one point, Reddington asked about seeing Lindsay in the courthouse lockup. Dr. Zeisel started giving an answer, but there was quickly an objection.
"2023, I've met with Ms. Clancy over 45 times since then, and that was at the writing and the issuance of my report to Attorney Reddington. That was in the middle of June, and I've seen Ms. Clancy since then 20 times probably, or 15, inclusive of being in this courtroom and sometimes meeting with her in the holding unit."
And you've had occasion to visit with her in Tewksbury Hospital many of those times, right?
Yes.
And you've had occasion to visit with her in the lockup to this courthouse, correct?
Yes.
And she's been treated very well by everybody, the court officers, everybody, is that correct?
Objection. All of this.
Yeah, sustained.
Well, you've had a chance to see her and
So, of course, Reddington, always avoiding a sidebar at all costs, withdrew the question, but sometimes a question hits harder than an answer would have anyway. But regardless, he moved on. Dr. Zeisel said that he continued meeting with Lindsay at Tewksbury Hospital because her mental health wasn't something that could just be evaluated once and then considered frozen in time. He described mental health as dynamic. Some information is static, like a person's date of birth. Other things can change from day to day, like mood, health, psychological functioning. And because Lindsay was facing a triple homicide case, Dr. Zeisel said he needed to continue evaluating her current mental state, and that included making sure she remained competent to stand trial and psychologically stable enough to participate in the proceedings. Her self-harming thoughts and her current state of mind were also ongoing areas of concern that he has continued to monitor while she is in custody. Reddington then moved into Lindsay's history, particularly the period following the birth of Callan in the spring of 2022. Dr. Zeisel had taken a family history, a school history, a medical history directly from Lindsay. Then he also reviewed the medical records involving providers such as Dr. Tufts and Rebecca Gelada, along with the medications that had been prescribed to Lindsay. For purposes of his evaluation, he focused particularly on the period from roughly September 2022 through January 2023. And during those months, Lindsay had reported a number of symptoms to multiple people. Reddington asked specifically about the period when she first began seeking treatment for anxiety and insomnia. Dr. Zeisel confirmed that she had seen Dr. Tufts and that this was when she began reporting those concerns and was prescribed an SSRI. He described Lindsay's mood around the summer of 2022 as waxing and waning, but she was also struggling in ways that might seem understandable on the surface. She had 3 children who were all 5 years old and younger, and managing 3 very young children. And that was obviously demanding. And also, I want to point out their ages. Cora had just barely turned 5, so she had 3 children, 4 and under. Then in the fall, she saw Dr. Tufts and was prescribed Zoloft. She initially started at 25 milligrams, but the dose eventually increased to 50 milligrams. But according to Dr. Zeisel, Lindsay did not respond well to the medication. She didn't immediately start taking it, waiting several weeks before beginning the lower dose. And when the medication was eventually increased, she did not experience the improvement they would have hoped for. Dr. Zeisel described it as not providing a therapeutic uplift. She didn't feel better. Her insomnia also continued to worsen as the months went on. And Lindsay kept looking for help. As September turned into October and then November, around Thanksgiving, she continued reaching out to healthcare providers. One of the first people involved was her mother-in-law, Sue Clancy, who worked as a labor and delivery nurse. The connection eventually led Lindsay to South Shore Perinatal Health, where she initially saw nurse practitioner Julie Paul. Paul described medication for Lindsay, and Lindsay continued receiving care through South Shore Perinatal. But that arrangement did not last very long. Paul left after being transferred to another position. And Dr. Zeisel made clear that her departure was not because of anything involving Lindsay or her patient load. So after Paul left, Lindsay began seeing Rebecca Gelada, another nurse practitioner. Dr. Zeisel testified that Lindsay had 3 appointments with Gelada, and during those appointments, Lindsay was prescribed Seroquel. And then, after the Seroquel, according to Dr. Zeisel, she reacted poorly to it. And as the holiday season approached, her symptoms were becoming increasingly concerning. Lindsay was telling healthcare providers that she did not feel well and that she felt out of touch with herself. She described feeling numb and experiencing dissociation. Reddington stopped there to make sure the jury understood what that meant.
Any concerns about her health? She wasn't feeling well. She felt out of touch with herself. She felt numb. She experienced dissociation.
All right, stop right there. What is dissociation?
Dissociation is a psychological construct that means you feel removed from your body. You don't feel in touch with your body. You feel different than the way you normally do. You look back at your life and you say, something is wrong with me. I'm not feeling the way I normally do.
Did she express, for example, when the jurors were looking at the medical records on November 27th of 2022 to nurse practitioner Gelada, that she felt that she was out of her body and that she had a disassociated state?
Yes, and that's sometimes known as a depersonalization. You feel removed from your body. You feel removed. You feel as if you are not in your full body.
Now, at that time, was she also complaining of other symptoms? And to cut to the chase, was she saying that she could not emote, she couldn't feel love, she couldn't feel happiness, she felt heavy,
Yeah.
she couldn't walk, she couldn't bathe, she had difficulty relating to people? Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. She couldn't get out of the bed. She had total flattened affect.
Did she then seek additional help?
Yes.
Where?
She went to the, I believe, the emergency room initially at South Shore to go to Mass General.
And did they prescribe additional medication for her?
I believe they did, yes.
Did she make any expressions to her treating physicians up to this point about what in her opinion, what the medications were doing to her?
Yes.
What did she say?
She said she was in a brain fog. The medications were making things worse. They were not helping. They were not helping her.
Now, as that time went on into the period of Thanksgiving up to around Christmas, did she continue to reach out to people for help, such as suicide hotlines?
Yes, she reached out to.
The answer is yes.
Yes.
Why did she call a suicide hotline?
She was worried about killing herself.
And did she get any help from the suicide hotline?
She was turned away.
How about the second time she called the suicide hotline?
She was turned away.
How about when she went to the Women and Infants program in Rhode Island?
They told her she was not a good fit for the program.
Why?
Because she was overly medicated.
And did she continue to seek help from healthcare providers?
Yes.
And what was the next thing that happened as far as dealing with healthcare providers for Lindsay in her postpartum stage?
She went to the Mass General Emergency Room.
What happened there?
On 12:30, she said she needed to go to the hospital. She was at the emergency room. She was sent to McLean Hospital in Belmont. It's a Harvard-affiliated hospital.
Now that McLean Hospital, when you say was sent to, they had to say that even though they had to transport her, it was a voluntary commitment?
Yes.
And what was her state of mind that caused her to have a voluntary commitment to the locked wards of McLean Hospital?
She was worried about killing herself, and she uttered concerns about killing her children.
How about, did she relate any intrusive thoughts, dark thoughts, things of that nature during this period of time, October, November, December?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
She said she had, quote, horrible thoughts, unquote. She felt that people could actually hear her thoughts. The thoughts were so loud that strangers could hear them.
Did she express at that point, for example, that she was concerned about school teachers with the Little Sprouts school with the kids, that they could read her thoughts and that she would lose custody?
Yes, it's called ideas of reference. You believe other people can hear what you're thinking, and that can have a very negative interpretation for the person believing that, feeling that, and thinking that the outcome is going to be a negative one, that their children may be relieved from their care.
Now, as it relates to the concept of a psychosis, can you tell me in 25 words or less what a psychosis is?
A psychosis is what's considered a major mental health disorder. It's when people have disorganized thinking, and the symptoms most typically are hallucinations. There are different types of hallucinations. 80% of people with psychoses hear voices. There are different types of voices that one can hear. Benign, get a glass of water. Benevolent, you're a good person, keep it up. Or malevolent, threatening them, telling them, ordering them to do something horrible, and you believe those voices.
During that period of time, when she got out of the McLean Hospital, what medication was she titrating or getting off of?
I believe she's getting off the Seroquel.
Was she able to do that?
Yes.
Relating back to November 27th with the dissociative state, is that an indicia, is that an indication or a harbinger of psychosis?
Yes.
And is a psychosis, is that something that somebody would be suffering from a psychosis for a month at a time, 2 months at a time, or is that short periods, or how does that work?
People with psychoses have intermittent symptoms. They can function fine one day, and the next day they can be hearing voices. They could be seeing things, feeling things, smelling things. To be clear, those additional types of hallucinations did not plague Ms. Clancy. She only had auditory hallucinations, but hallucinations are like the waves at the beach. They come and go.
They're called waxing and waning?
Yes.
And would you tell me, doctor, in your opinion, is an individual, and we refer to postpartum psychosis, is that a particular affliction that afflicts women that have had babies and they go through a period of postpartum depression and then ultimately postpartum psychosis?
Yes.
Can you tell us, is a person, even if they are in the throes of psychosis, are they able to make a phone call?
Yes, they can.
Are they able to drive a car?
Yes.
Are they able to say, hi, how are you? I'd like to have a hot dog?
Yes.
They don't have to look at the unicorn in the corner, right?
That's correct.
You know, and with that, the judge called it a day after he explained, one of the most important parts of this and what psychosis is. It was a powerful way to end the day for the defense. The jury was dismissed and court recessed. A very big day for this trial. I want to thank all of those that have been so supportive and generous during this stream. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Really, just you guys, thank you. This is the most amazing group of people. You guys stick through with me, even with a cough and during hard days. And I just want to say thank you. And we also have Patreon, patreon.com/IntoCrime if you're interested in additional episodes over there. And we will have Dr. John discussing this testimony shortly as well. I know many of you said that. And right now, I've actually talked with Dr. Leslie Dobson about many of the questions I've been seeing of yours in chat. That was earlier today that we shared that. So we will be right back here tomorrow, day 16. And thank you, everyone, as we continue following this trial. What a life tonight. We'll see you.